Hey everybody, I'm Jason from Fuzzlord, and in this video we're going to be talking about how overdrive and distortion pedals are different. So we're going to talk a little bit about what makes those circuits different. We're going to listen to some sound clips, and I think by the end of the video you're going to know why you like the pedals that you do, and you might have a little more insight when you're choosing your next pedal. Don't go anywhere, we're starting right now. Hey Bob, where are these wires going? I don't think they're quite finished up yet. Before we get started though, if you're new to the channel, I just wanted to say I appreciate you stopping by. We put out a video every week, so if you haven't yet, you might want to subscribe so you don't miss any weekly videos about guitars, amps, and music gear. Also, if you want to keep up with me on a daily, just check out the Instagram page at Fuzzlord Effects, and if you want to know more about what we do or supporting this channel, check out the links in the description. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the differences and kind of the similarities between overdrive and distortion pedals. For this video specifically, we're going to be focusing on op-amp, overdrive, and distortion pedals that either use hard clipping or soft clipping to create their drive sound. There's a lot of different flavors of distortion and overdrive pedals out there, so before we get started, I just wanted to specify that this is what we're going to focus on. So this is going to include pedals like the Ibanez Tube Screamer, and the Boss DS1 Distortion, for example. I'm curious to know what you're playing, if you got a preference between overdrive and distortion, so why don't you drop a comment below and let me know what kind of pedals you're using on your board. First, let's talk a little bit about the circuit design that makes these two style pedals a little bit different. So an overdrive pedal is going to amplify the signal. In our case, it's going to be using an op amp to amplify the signal. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take some diodes in a soft clipping configuration. So what that means is the op amp gain stage uses some clipping diodes that are tied from the output back to the input, and what that does is as we try to increase the gain and get more clipping out of the pedal, we're going to call drive or any sort of like gain or saturation clipping in this video. The more we want to amplify that signal and make it clip, the more the op amp is going to correct itself with that negative feedback loop and those soft clipping diodes. If you want to know more about soft clipping versus hard clipping, there's another video on the channel you might want to check out. What this looks like if we were to actually take an oscilloscope or like look at the actual sound waves going through the pedal is, imagine that we had a clean sine wave going into the pedal. So I'm imagining playing an A note 440 hertz on a humbucker guitar that puts out about 400 millivolts. What's going to happen is we put our clean signal going into the overdrive, and then with the soft clipping diodes and the negative feedback loop, as we turn up the gain, those peaks of the sine wave are going to stretch out and become more elongated, and our ears are going to hear that as like clipping or drive on our guitar or bass. But in the circuit, if we were to look at the actual sound wave, that's what will be happening, and that's what we refer to as soft clipping. So the unique thing about overdrive pedals is that they usually use diodes in a soft clipping configuration, which takes the output of the signal and loops it back to the input using negative feedback to help create the sound that we associate with overdrive. So with all that in mind, let's hear one of the most classic overdrive circuits of all time, and that's going to be the Ibanez Tube Screamer. So we're not going to be using the Tube Screamer in this video, we're going to be using the Fuzzlord Effects Doom Screamer, which is like inspired by the Tube Screamer, and we're also going to be using a Bad Monkey overdrive. We're going to play some riffs, and my friend Eric Marrow, who is a fellow YouTuber, is also going to play some riffs too. So let's hear what the overdrive sounds like now that we have a little bit of an idea of how they work. So now we've talked about overdrive and listened to it, let's talk about distortion. Distortion is going to be very similar. We're going to take a gain stage to increase the amplitude of our signal, and we're going to use diodes once again to clip our signal and introduce more drive and what we hear as distortion. The biggest difference with the distortion pedals, instead of using soft clipping, we use hard clipping. Again, there's another video on this channel where we specifically talk about soft clipping and hard clipping and look at it with an O-scope. In general, the way hard clipping is going to be used in a distortion pedal that's op-amp based is we're going to use an op-amp to increase the amplitude of a signal, amplify it, and then the output of the op-amp, again, is going to have those clipping diodes, but instead of looping back to the input and doing soft clipping, they're going to be tied to ground in a hard clipping configuration. Instead of like gently correcting things, like as you try to give more gain, it tries to correct it, and we get those nice soft peaks that we associate with overdrive. What's going to happen is the diodes are just going to chop the signal, the peaks off the signal top and bottom, and it very much acts like a hard limiter. So depending on what kind of diodes you use is how that's going to work, but just imagine we got something where we're going to amplify the clean signal. Remember that A 440 hertz again? We're going to take it, our input signal, let's say it was 400 millivolts again, we're going to amplify it. Imagine it goes up to like 1 volt. And then we're going to run it through some diodes that usually start conducting at about 0.7 volts, and what happens is it chops off the tops and the bottoms of the peaks, gives it more of a square wave look instead of those nice soft peaks of the overdrive, and that's what we hear as distortion. So some good examples of hard clipping distortion pedals are going to be like the Proco Rat, or a more mild distortion pedal would be like the Boss DS1. So let's hear what some distortion pedals sound like. Let's go ahead and check out a Boss DS1, a more lower gain distortion pedal. And then we're also going to check out a Fuzzlord Drone Master, which is based off the classic Proco Rat. All right, now that we've talked about overdrive, we've talked about distortion, we've heard the two, let's go ahead and compare some overdrive and distortion clips with the same riff back to back so we can just hear them one after another. Drop a comment below and let us all know which you preferred in this section. All right, I know there's people about to start commenting about how this certain famous overdrive pedal was actually a distortion and this distortion was an overdrive. There's a couple cool pedals out there like the DOD 250 or a couple others that they were marketed as an overdrive, but they were actually on a circuit more like a distortion using hard clipping. So none of these things are like hard rules, but usually people that are more into like blues or classic rock or things that are like lower gain, they're going to gravitate towards like an overdrive. A lot of times people are going to play like punk music, metal, they're going to want a distortion. But don't let that like always like influence your choice, because you can always let's say that you're a blues player but you want a little bit more of aggressive sound. Well, you might grab a distortion pedal and use it more like the way people use an overdrive pedal. Or you might be someone that's in like a metal band that's inspired by like more vintage style doom bands, and instead of getting like a nasty rat distortion, you might go with something more like a tube screamer into a JCM 800 to get more of like a tight vintage lower gain sound. And so again, with all that in mind, drop us a comment and let us all know what your go-to overdrive or distortion pedals are and kind of how you set up your pedal board and dial in your sound. All right, so I hope you had fun watching this video where we got to dive into overdrive and distortion pedals and what makes them different, how they're similar, and maybe you have more of an idea of what your favorite kind of pedal is now. So again, I'm curious to know if you like overdrive or distortion more, like what's your personal preference. So drop a comment below, let me know where you're watching from, if you're more into overdrive or distortion, and I'm always curious to know what one of your favorite pedals is. Again, I'm Jason from Fuzzlord. If you haven't yet, I would really appreciate if you'd subscribe to the channel. I wanted to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon supporters whose names we're running on the screen right now. These are all folks that help support this YouTube channel through our Patreon page. If you want to know more about supporting this channel and catch some more behind the scenes footage, check the link in the description. Also, a big thank you and a shout out to our producer level supporters, David, Troy, and Rustin. Really appreciate you. Until next video, I hope you all have a good week, and I look forward to talking to you all in the comments.